All right, thank you for that, Rich. With us now is Pete Buttigieg, the former mayor in Indiana, kind enough to sort of weigh in on this race. It's always good to have you, Pete, but I wanted to get your thoughts on the nasty tone of this election. You had said not too long ago, I hope I quote you correctly, wouldn't it be nice to have a more normal political life in this country? Would any of that change no matter who wins?
Well, I think so. One of the reasons I've been struck by how many prominent Republicans are supporting Kamala Harris is it's not that they suddenly became less conservative or even that they agree with her on most issues. It's that they want us to have a more normal Republican Party again. You know, we just heard President Trump joking about shooting journalists yesterday or the other day. We heard about him. We heard him talk about, aiming guns at one of his political critics. By the way, a Republican who happened to criticize him. One of the things I most respect about conservatives over the years, even though I haven't always agreed with them, is a love of freedom. And I think that love of freedom has propelled many of them to reject somebody who has made it clear that if you cross him or criticize him, whether you're a journalist, a Democrat, or even a Republican, he's coming for you, and he thinks that you're the enemy. Look, it's one thing to have all kinds of intense policy fights over fiscal policy, social policy, you name it. That's normal, that's healthy, that's part of our system. Threatening violence against political opponents is not, and we need to put that in the rearview mirror. Again, I think a lot of Republicans feel the same way. That's why we have this unbelievable spectacle right now, seeing everybody from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney pulling in the same direction.
You know, Mayor used to run South Bend, Indiana. Indiana, a reliably red state. News we got today is Iowa, a reliably red state, is leaning to Kamala Harris. That would be a big surprise if the poll put out there from the Des Moines Register pans out, because Donald Trump won that state big in the last two elections. What did you make of that?
It was really striking. I, of course, know Iowa well from having campaigned there, and I know the reputation of this pollster. She is the most respected pollster in Iowa, one of the most respected pollsters in the country, and by the way, correctly predicted a big Trump win in the last two elections in Iowa. So this is a very striking finding. Now, one poll is just one poll, no matter how good the pollster is. You never know for sure, but it could be an indicator that, Trump really is losing some of those moderates and conservatives. And of course, we know how many women are responding very strongly to the fact that he took away their right to choose, one of the only campaign promises he actually kept. That's something that I think has made it possible. If you look at 2022, when, all of the normal laws of politics would say that the president's party should have been clobbered and instead did quite well in the midterms. Those dynamics are still out there. Now, there's headwinds, too. If you look around the world, it's actually very rare for an incumbent government to succeed in an election right now. And one of the things we have right now, of course, is the vice president. She's the sitting vice president, but also represents generational change compared to Donald Trump. So it's just an unusual dynamic. It's hard to predict based on polls or models, which is why I think the most important thing is ground game. As I'm speaking to you from a field office in Jackson County, Michigan, I just spoke to an incredible number of fired up volunteers. Local party folks tell me they're not sure they've ever seen that many volunteers at a single canvass kickoff. We believe that more than anything else, more than the ads, the polls, the mailers, you name it. We believe that's going to be the key to her victory.
Women will be the key to her victory. You just mentioned, of course, on the abortion issue on X, you've written that American women will turn out to ensure Kamala Harris defeats the man who took away their right to choose. But the fact of the matter is you know very well, Mayor, it's a gender gap like the kind that we've never seen in recent American history, where men overwhelmingly want Donald Trump and women overwhelmingly prefer her. What will close that deal?
Well, again, that gender gap partly driven, of course, by how strongly women feel about having their right to choose taken away by Donald Trump. But I do think it's important in these closing hours of the campaign for us to message to men as well, not just that men should care about women's rights just as much as women do, but also that men should care about her pro-family policies, the child tax credit, and making sure that we have a more affordable way of raising kids in this country with things like paid parental leave, which would apply to men as well as to women, but also just core economic issues. You know, a lot of men are, of course, union construction workers. They've noticed that we are experiencing record high in factory construction now. If you go look it up online right now, the chart is off the charts, so to speak, in terms of the boom we're seeing right now in factory construction, the jobs that's creating for men and women and children, living from the prosperity created by workers in that manufacturing boom compared to the manufacturing recession we had under Donald Trump. Those are the kinds of things I think we need to make sure that we're messaging to men and women alike.
You know, you have reached and reach out to Republican voters and conservatives. You've been in Midland, Texas. That is not generally seen as a blue wall bastion. You've even reached out to a number of other conservatives. When Elon Musk was critical of you, you personally called him. He was impressed by that. I don't want to get into the details. But you've done this a number of times. Unfortunately, Kamala Harris has not, Mayor. And I don't know what the final results will be. But do you think that's something she'll regret, that she has not done enough of that?
I'm not sure I can agree with the premise of that question. I mean, she pledged to include Republicans in her cabinet. I'm not sure I've ever seen a Democratic candidate do that. She has invited prominent Republican elected officials to campaign with her on the trail. I don't think you see that a lot.
But she also called him a fascist, right? She also called him a fascist. That's no way to break bread and make peace. Right?
Well, she said, yeah, she said that she did not disagree with his chief of staff, who said that, somebody who knows him well. And again,
do you think, Mayor, that Donald Trump is a fascist? Do you think he's that?
I don't think General Kelly is wrong. He knows Donald Trump much better than I do, and I would not contradict General Kelly in his assessment of his former boss. Look, we've never seen a president have his own chief of staff or his own vice president not support him. And by the same token, we've never seen a Democrat have that many Republicans who do support her. But I think the most important thing is the difference in the closing message between him talking about turning guns on people who disagree with him and her saying that if you're a Republican, you will have a seat at the table in my administration.
All right. Now, he specifically did not say turning guns at people who disagree, but I did want to get your final take on the tone and tenor, because for all the awful things you just mentioned about Donald Trump, these polls are still dead even. Do you then think half the Americans who seem to prefer him over Kamala Harris are clueless?
What I believe is that many people gather their information from different sources, and we need to reach across some of those divisions, which is exactly why I try to speak to conservative media and appear in conservative areas. Now, it's worth noting that Donald Trump has never won a majority of the American people, not in the election he won or in the election that he lost. I think that that's likely almost certain to be the case now, but just because you win in our system such as it is, even if most Americans don't choose you, you still could win in the Electoral College, which is why we need to make sure that we win according to the rules of the game, the way the Electoral College is set up. And the other thing that I think is important is that whether you vote for her or not, she will be a president for everybody. You know, just as in the Biden-Harris administration, you've seen so many benefits in terms of job creation, factory construction, and infrastructure improvements actually happening in rural areas, red areas, conservative areas. She wants to be a president for everybody.
Pete Buttigieg, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.